Now we are going to move on to the Neolithic period, which is that late period of the Stone Age, the last period of the Stone Age. And if we look back at our slide that went through the different ages of the Stone Age, we have spent the last few lectures talking about sites and artifacts that come from the Paleolithic period. And then we have the Mesolithic period, which we're kind of skipping over a bit, but there's some major changes that happen during the Mesolithic period that lead up to the Neolithic period, namely those climate changes and the innovations that humans um, needed to go through in order to adapt to those new environments and create new food sources, new, more refined tools. In the Neolithic period, again, this happens in various times in different places, but the main characteristic of the Neolithic period is that revolution in which agriculture is developed, which leads to people being able to stay for longer periods in settlements. And they are now not chasing herds, but rather able to domesticate animals and plant crops, which allow them to stay for longer periods in the same place. So these changes start to happen around 8000 BCE. And those changes really allow for stability. And as agriculture develops, we have farmers that are able to create a surplus of food. And this doesn't happen overnight. This happens over thousands of years. But as they get better at agriculture, get better at understanding the seasons and the patterns of weather, and they are no longer running for their lives from woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers, and are able to finally settle, farmers are able to create surpluses of food. And that means that life is more stable, and some people in the society are able to devote their lives towards something other than sustenance. So a military class develops, and we have warriors and soldiers that are concerned with the protection and defense of their group, their society, and possibly expanding the territory of their society beyond what they already have. We also have dedicated political figures who are responsible for creating community and organizing society. This might overlap with ceremonial or religious figures that are concerned with kind of the matters of leading rituals and ceremonies and creating belief systems that give people a sense of stability and peace. So there are certain characteristics of the Neolithic period, and there's kind of standards for how scholars decide that a certain society has moved into the Neolithic period, the Neolithic revolution. Because as I mentioned, this happens at different places at different times, and a lot of this is dependent on what the environment has produced for them. If, for example, in Europe, we have grassy plains that emerge, which lead to edible plants and forests that now can accommodate herds of people, herds of animals. That precipitates a organized system of agriculture. So it's very much dependent on what is going on the environment at the moment and the climate of that place. So in these characteristics, we have, you need to have an organized system of agriculture, domestication of animals, And this last part is very important. Permanent year-round settlements. So not necessarily chasing the weather, not having to leave one area once it gets cold and move to sort of a summer residence, but preparing for the seasons and having enough surplus and food storage to get one through the winter. So this is what characterizes the Neolithic period. What does that mean for the art that is produced during this period? What is new? What changes? Well, for one thing, we have more geometric forms combined with people and animals. Most of the work that we saw in cave paintings throughout southern France and northern Spain were of animals. We saw very few people with the animals. Now we see very simple but very clearly delineated people engaged with these animals and often engaged in everyday activities. Here I'm showing you a rock painting from Northern Africa in which we see people in motion with bows and arrows hunting in combination with animals. We also see boats, the indication of perhaps boats that show transport from place to place. So we see people engaged in very important day-to-day activities. They also can show the sophistication of the culture. Here we're also seeing weaponry, and the invention of bows and arrows really marks an innovative moment in which hunting could be much more precise. You can really nail your target with a bow and arrow in a way that you can't with a spear thrower. The location is very different. We now see rock paintings on rock shelters and the inside of rock shelters, not just caves. Remember, caves were not inhabitable. They were treacherous places. You had to really want to go in there into a dark, cold, cavernous, claustrophobic space in order to create these images, probably for rituals or rites or ceremony, but not necessarily to be seen on an everyday basis. These new locations for art are extremely easy access. The work is more didactic, more educational, and therefore more abstract. We see easier, almost stick-like figures that show a lot of action, a lot of dynamism. And the themes that we see, and I'm repeating a bit of what I've just described, is active people. Remember, we didn't see that many human figures, but now they are active, they are in motion, and they are engaged in the things that are the most important to them: battle, hunting, and dancing, entertaining themselves. Engaging in ritual, engaging in ceremony. In another rock painting that comes from this Neolithic period, from the caves in Spain, we see not just men in battle, but also women. And scholars have determined that these figures represent women. We see very elongated figures. They seem to be clothed, and they seem to have long hair. They have these pinched waists and perhaps flaring skirts. They seem to be in motion. We see a lot of flailing arms and legs that seem to be walking. And then below we see an animal, perhaps a deer, in what we can call a flying gallop. There is the attempt to show rapid motion, and this is a way of delineating speed with animals. So again, we see more often the engagement of people in everyday lives and the combination of figures with animals in a very simplistic, abstracted way, but showing a lot of information, giving us a lot of information about the figures. These are places that, like the cave paintings, would have been returned to over and over again. We don't get the sense necessarily that this is out of ritual, but rather because they were inhabited. But we get the sense that figuration becomes an increasingly important way of showing modern existence.